Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover-2 Podcast. I am Joel A. Erickson. I am joined, as always, by Nate Atkins. It is, what do we got here? 3 days before the first preseason game, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. We're recording this on Thursday. And unfortunately, we have news to discuss, significant news. Josh Downs gets hurt in practice, suffered imaging revealed a high ankle sprain. I mean, I shouldn't say typically, the general rule is that they give you 4 to 6 weeks, but I think most people who follow sports know high ankle sprains are complicated and tricky, and sometimes they go away fairly quick and sometimes they linger. And I'm not trying to make anybody feel concerned about it, but I am trying to set expectations a little bit for how this goes going forward. I would bet they don't put a timetable on it. Be my guess with Steichen, and then it's going to take some doing. But I think we can pretty much safely say we're not going to see Josh Downs again until the regular season.
Yeah, definitely. I think 4 weeks from the day would have been heading into week one. So it's possible that he clears it in that minimum time frame to get back for week one against the Texans. But I think people see things like this and they you hope for the minimum, but they're tricky. Like you said, it's a pretty important ligament for football players, and especially Josh Downs' style of game, which is all change of direction, all kind of making those cuts quickly. It's what's allowed him to, I think, be the best offensive player the Colts have this training. In and out of those breaks, he just has this ability to kind of move transition positions like that on the field and not lose any speed at all. So it's going to take a little bit to get back to that. So it'll be interesting to see when he comes back, just how back is he. We see last year he worked through an injury with the knee. There were times when he could kind of really didn't practice, and they were saving him just for select downs against the Panthers and Patriots last year, and he was giving it a go because they just had a very thin receiving core at the time. This year they don't have as thin of a receiving core, but you look at that slot position and it can kind of feel like not that much different than the spot he was in with that a year ago. So it helps that it's happening now where 4 of the weeks can be preseason training camp. I don't think he needs a ton of that. It would have been nice to get him acclimated with Anthony Richardson a little bit more. They've had a nice connection, but obviously didn't play a ton on the field last year. But the main thing is getting him back and getting him ready to go and back to the form of the player we've seen the last few weeks, because he's just been pretty much uncoverable for any corner I've seen go against him outside of moments with Kenny Moore. That's been kind of a back and forth battle that's been fun to watch. Two really good players, but they need that version of him because, that he's the one bankable piece in the receiving game outside of Michael Pittman Jr. And yeah, it's pretty important to have him back, especially the way that they're building this team right now is they want to, they need to light it up on offense, and that needs to be the driving force for them. And so I think he's a key piece to balancing all the desires they want to do in the run game with having a stable and consistent and sometimes explosive passing game. So, all eyes on Josh and how he recovers from this. Interesting too, because he's wired as like a guy who doesn't take any days off. Like he'll go and lift and work out on Christmas, and so it'll be interesting to see how he just sets it aside for 4 weeks or so, and just how they manage this and how much patience do they give it versus getting him back out there when the games hit.
You make a good point, and it's actually something I hadn't really thought about yet, just in terms of what it's going to do to him from a physical standpoint, what he's good at, what he does to change direction. Like you think about Jonathan Taylor getting hurt, the high ankle sprain a couple of years ago, where he got hurt, got healthy enough to come back, came back, was running, but didn't really look like himself, and then re-injured himself against the Vikings. If Downs is going through that, where his ankle doesn't quite feel right, he's back on the field, I think I've written about this several times. I think you have as well, but just he had 40 catches in the first 8 games last year and was averaging. He had a lot of explosive plays in there in those 40 catches. After that, outside of the big play in the Patriots game when he had the knee, because he had the knee against Carolina, and then outside of that, he really didn't do much down the field until the last 2 games of the season. It was just that catch. You look, he went 1 for 10, 2 for 40. That's the game where he had the big one. 5 for 43, 3 for 14, 3 for 32, 3 for 19, and 6 for 39. That's just he's played through injury before, but he's not quite as explosive. And what we've seen so far, like you said, on the training camp fields, is that he's been making some plays down the field. And so I think if you're taking a long view here, the Colts probably should let this heal as much as possible if they can. I don't have any inside info on this yet. I'm planning to ask Shane Steichen about it on Friday when we get him. We're taping this on Thursday. I also wonder if tightrope surgery is a possible. So for those who don't know, tightrope surgery is something that's come up a while ago. I remember reading about it when Tua Tagovailoa was at Alabama, and Alabama did it with a lot of their players who had high ankle sprains because it accelerates recovery by putting a replacement ligament in while the other ligaments heal. They're not going to tell us tightrope surgery in that kind of detail, but they might say whether or not he's going to have a procedure done. So I wonder if that's also a possibility here to find a way to get him back on the field quicker than otherwise, and maybe give him some help going forward.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they want to handle it. Jonathan Taylor, who had a high ankle sprain, he ended up after that season in 2022, he went in for arthroscopic debridement, which is just a 2 to 3 week recovery. We didn't really get to track that progress for him because that's when it was the offseason and got into the contract stuff and all of that. But what was different there is that Jonathan Taylor went on injured reserve a month before that. So he had pretty much let it sort of rest in isolation, heal, however you want to phrase it, for a month, and then got that procedure. So there are some different options. They could just do purely rest it. But that's where it's like at some point they're going to want to test that ankle and get it back out there. And it's just like his style of game, like we're talking about, is such a high usage of that. You think of the Josh Downs physical profile. You've got this player who's trying to be the anomaly at 5'9" and 170 pounds, who can be a big difference-making receiver. How does he do that? Well, he's got these elite football skills. His hands are great. He can leave his feet with grace and catch the ball and track it and all of that. But I think the best part of his game, though, right now is the route running, is just how advanced he's gotten in the playbook, pre-snap motions to running a variety of different routes against zone and man coverage from the slot. But it's that change of direction. It's settling in super quickly when they read it as zone, catching, turning, being a little bit of a yak guy in that way. And then it's kind of really crisply moving in and out of these cuts. You see that in the one-on-one drills he does, where he just annihilates corners because, he just cuts so gracefully and really sells that he's going in one direction, cuts to the other, and he's not losing any speed to do that, while the corner is, using every level of his speed to recover to that. In Josh Downs, he doesn't have, so he's not going to win as much with his physicality. He's not going to be a jump ball guy. He's got to be a separation guy. And so his whole game is built on that ankle right now. And that's why it's just really unfortunate that this injury happened. Injuries are going to happen. We saw it, Samson Ebicom went down with an Achilles tear. Some things just happen that way, but this one felt avoidable watching it. And it's just one of those where, they did dodge a bullet in the sense that it's not a broken ankle, but I wouldn't get too overly positive about it either, because it is such an important ligament. he's got to have it not just workable, like Jonathan Taylor got it to at a certain point, but explosive again, absolutely strong and explosive. And it's going to take some time and some effort to do that.
Yeah, I've seen it portrayed elsewhere as like this is the best possible outcome. It's not really.
No.
Like the best possible outcome is probably a low ankle sprain, which those are more, well, maybe not more common. I think those are more common. That's like you roll your ankle and it goes on the bottom. Those tend to heal better than the high ankle. The worst case scenario here is he breaks his ankle and he has ligament damage on top of that, and then they have to do surgery. That would be like a Kamoko Toure injury that altered his career. Obviously, we're not talking about that, but high ankle sprains are significant. They're difficult for guys to get through, and they do have a tendency to linger. So, I just want to. I think the biggest thing is I just want to sort of temper the temptation to be like, oh, we dodged a bullet. He'll be back week 1. I don't know that. I don't think anybody knows that right now. And depending on how this high ankle sprain goes, I'd be curious to find out, what's going to happen. So, just very interesting in terms of how it's portrayed and how people look at it. I think one of the other things is, and this is if Josh Downs has to miss time. We talked about this we were talking about this yesterday when the injury happened, but also I think we should just talk about it on the podcast. They don't really have Josh Downs light to play backup. No. Because like I know that the obvious answer is Anthony Gold, and size wise, Anthony Gold is not a big dude. But their style of play that we've seen from those two players during training camp is not the same. It's just not. Gold has been more of a deep threat. I would say I don't want to use that comparison. Give me a little fast guy who goes deep but isn't a huge name that'll make people think I'm saying he's in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, I mean, Brandon Cooks is the guy that comes to mind as far as like speed out of the slot downfield plays. But yeah, he's a little more established.
Well, and Brandon Cooks also was insanely productive at Oregon State, and Anthony Gold was not as a receiver. They
are both from Oregon State, though. So
yes,
there you go.
I just think he's more of a downfield vertical jet sweep type option than he is at the say option route. Settling into zones, finding the hole in the zone type of guy. I don't think it's the same. Does that make sense? Like maybe he will be eventually, but I haven't really seen that from him on the practice field so far. He's been more of a downfield speed option. And then you've got Michael Pittman, but obviously if you move Michael Pittman to the slot, that means that either A.D. Mitchell or Alec Pierce has to be able to do the Pittman stuff on the outside. I don't know if I've seen that from either of them. If I've seen it from anyone, it's been more Pierce than Mitchell so far. As crazy as that is to say. But charting-wise, Mitchell's passes have frequently come sort of in the 10 to 15-yard range. Those sort of short, high-percentage throws. There have been more of those to Pierce so far. So, and then obviously a tight end, maybe like Will Mallory could do. Will Mallory has a hamstring injury right now. Who knows where that is? Although he's been riding a bike, so I don't think it's super serious. But Will Mallory did some of that, like settling in his own stuff. Kylan Granson is more of a crossing route guy. Does that feel right?
Mm-hmm.
Than a settle in zone. They just don't have a guy who fits that the same way that Josh Downs did. They didn't really last year either. They thought they did with Isaiah McKenzie, but we all saw how that turned out. I guess I'm not saying that any of these guys are going to get suspended for 3 games for being not smart. I think that's Zaire Franklin's words, right? Not mine.
I think he said dumb.
So I'm not saying that, but they don't have like I said, they don't have a Josh Downs light option to go to in this scenario. And I think that does have ramifications for the passing game if he has to miss time, because some of his ability to stop and find the zone or find the spot, give Anthony Richardson a target. I think that comes into play on RPOs. I think that comes into play on 3rd and 5. It's just there's a lot of ways they can answer it, but I do think that it would take some redesigning and emphasizing other things in the playbook from Shane Steichen, because you can't really replicate what Downs is supposed to do in this offense.
Yeah, I was just trying to find this guy because when I was thinking of when you're describing that like short guy who just flies on the field from the slot, Taylor Gabriel is the guy that comes to mind.
There you go. There you go.
Taylor Gabriel, that's kind of the path that Anthony Gould's on. And yeah, I mean, Anthony Gould, I think, was more of a college receiver than I think some people give him credit for. The Colts liked the developmental potential of that, but it's developmental. Like his focus is so much on special teams. When you have rookies like that, very rarely do they have it in them to do both of those type of things. So yeah, it's going to be hard to replace Josh Downs. He started like role wise as they built this out with him. He started to look a lot to me like the Colts version of Golden Tate, and Golden Tate was a slot receiver on the Lions when Jim Bob Cooter was the offensive coordinator, and I was with him in Detroit, and their entire passing game was built around that role. So they had, I'd say, good, not great outside receivers like Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay, pretty good. But their number one, it was kind of Golden Tate. He went for 1,000 yards 3 different times in 4 years there, and different style of player. Golden's a very weird player where he sort of like starts off the line really slowly and just sort of accelerates and keeps accelerating, and you don't know how he's able to do that. And Josh Downs is much more of a very quick in and out of every break type player. But in terms of like the pre-snap motion, the way that they're going to reveal to the quarterback, whether it's man or zone, the ability of that player to then have routes that can kill man coverage. Golden Tate would have this kind of elongated rub route. Josh Downs can win a little earlier in the down on those plays, but they're both killer on against zone. That player is what they're missing. I don't think you can expect Anthony Gould to do all that, especially when he's got that sort of like his skill set right now does look like he's like a 1-speed runner, very fast, but it's just like it's a straight line type of game right now, and that's not the way that they ideally want to take advantage of revealing a defense that's in zone coverage and exploiting it from the slot. So for as long as Josh Downs is out, my assumption is, that they do sort of a committee approach to it, where I think there's times where Michael Pittman can come into the slot, be that big slot. I think that helps with their run game, because then you bring in A.D. Mitchell and Alec Pierce on the outside. Now you have Pittman in the slot, who's like, he can block like some tight ends in this league. We've seen Shane Steichen get creative with using him sort of as a crack block type of guy, just someone who kind of seals an edge, kind of takes out a player that can mess up the play. So there's some of that, but I don't think it's the same thing as far as, using him on the jet motions and just making him a slot receiver. So Kylan Granson, Will Mallory, I'm sure there'd be packages for them. I'm sure some of it is, I think they would go a little bit more to the heavy personnel at times. Now, they did that when Michael Pittman got hurt last year, really went heavy and ran the ball. Part of that, though, it's not the same thing, because that was more about they didn't have any outside receivers to trust. So Josh Downs can't move inside to the outside and block. So this is different as far as that. You can move Pittman from outside to inside, and he can block even better than Josh Downs can from the inside. So I still think they'll live in a lot of 2x2 formations, which they do more than just about anybody. Well, still a lot of 11 personnel, but I just think it's more of a grab bag of, they'll lean a little bit more into the run game, a little bit more into, Pittman in the slot, Granson in the slot, Mallory in the slot, but it does put a lot more pressure, a good bit more pressure on that receiving group of Pierce and Mitchell, who so far I've said I don't feel like they feel the pressure for any volume role. If Downs is out, someone's got to do more of that. So it's either those guys or the tight ends, who we've got no answers on so far. But that would be that sort of short area. They got to have something in this passing game where they can win in short area and give Anthony Richardson some easy bankable completions. not let every, consistent yardage gain be through the run game. And so, yeah, it's tricky. It's someone that's really, I think it puts a spotlight on the tight ends more than anything, because either way, if they go 2 tight ends and they go bigger, or they just want to live in 11 personnel, someone's got to take that short area production. Tight ends are the guys you're going to look to do a lot of that. And that's the group that I really need to see more out of this camp than what we've seen so far.
Yeah, I would say, like, with Kylan Granson and Mo Alley Cox, I think they've been basically what you would expect from them. Like, I think Mo Alley Cox is making the team, and he's going to have, kind of like last year, there's going to be like 3 big plays where Shane gets into heavy personnel and then uses what the look is against the defense and gets Mo open. But he's not going to be a volume player. We've seen it. We've seen the Colts try that. It doesn't work. And then Granson, same thing. Like, we've seen Granson do some nice things, but it's the same stuff Granson's always done. So you'd have to get the elevation from somewhere. And actually, maybe we can make this transition into it. Jelani Woods, it's maybe not happening right now. Not the way the Colts needed it to, or the way that they would have thought when they, at least I haven't seen it in training camp. I don't feel like I've seen it in training camp where he's had a lot of chances. I will say that. He's had chances, especially from Joe Flacco. But it feels like every time there's a like the kind of ball that he should be getting, up the seam, in a window, he has to jump and make a move for it, use all that length. Feels like he's not making the catch. That might be overly harsh, but that's my observations from watching, 9 practices so far, going on 10, is it feels a little bit actually like the Mo Alley Cox year when they tried to make him the number 1 tight end. They're giving him chances to prove it, and it's just not really happening. And the last practice we were at, Jelani Woods was in a developmental period, which they call those developmental periods, but there are some guys in all those developmental periods who are, I would say, less developmental and more veteran on the backside of the roster, if you know what I'm saying. I haven't seen him, and maybe in the preseason games we start to see it, but I haven't seen it on a day in, day out basis in training camp so far.
Yeah, he needs to get going a little bit. Part of this was he's missed an entire year of football, and kind of he reworked his body in a lot of ways with all those hamstring issues, transferring weight from the lower to upper half, just a totally different training process that could get him healthy. And so that if you're looking for positives with Jelani, so far that process of rewiring his body to be able to practice at this level and stay on the field and not have hiccups so far has worked. 9 practices, haven't seen any injury scares with him. I talked to him about a week ago, and he's feeling really good about the physical development side of things. The football side of things is what that I think we maybe didn't think about enough, brace for enough, is just being out of football skills for so long after having a low volume role as a rookie, after transitioning from being a college quarterback to a college tight end for basically 1 season at a position that's already the hardest probably to transition from college to the NFL. So he's behind, and you see it. You still see the skill set. Yesterday he had a couple catches where he's kind of out in the open, kind of like a catch along the sidelines. He's able to catch and run. He had kind of a deep over that was sort of like that. Those plays where he's not having to adjust as much and work hand-eye coordination and body control, where they just kind of get the ball in his hands and you get him moving. You still see this guy who, he had a relative athletic score of 10 out of 10, one of the best that you'll ever see. So I still think if he can be healthy enough to be that, there's going to be a role for him on some, whether it's, RPOs, tight end screens, which Shane Steichen absolutely loves. But, they need the football skills to develop a lot more. And that's both receiving and blocking, where that was a big part of his game he needed to learn. Missed an entire year last year. he's now blocking with sort of a different frame than he's ever blocked with before. So, he's not had the best camp so far, but I still say I think he's the only high upside option that they have in this tight end room. If there's going to be a guy who could really step up and be a guy that looks like a tight end one, it needs to be him, because Mo Alley-Cox, we've seen that. He's now kind of full-time blocker and occasional red zone play action type, tricky player, but not a guy that's going to beat coverages. Drew Ogletree has 9 career catches. He's also in that blocker role. I think he's competing to make it.
And he's been kind of inconsistent as a receiver in camp. There's been some bobbles, some drops. Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of all of them. I've seen some. I mean, Will Mallory's currently dealing with another injury. That's what's been tough for him. And Jelani Woods, you're learning a very difficult position, and you're not on the field to learn it. So they're going to be naturally slower to that. And then I think Kylan Granson, like you've laid out, it's a useful skill set. It's just limited. And so that's kind of where they're at with this room, is they have these useful skill sets that are limited. The blocking of Ogletree or Woods or Alley-Cox, the select number of routes that Kylan Granson can run, kind of settling into zones or just working crossers, or Jelani Woods on these kind of screen plays, RPO, get the ball quickly and go. They don't have a guy that's showing he can do it all. And when they have their 4 wide receivers, I put it that group now, and a really great backfield, you think about it less. It's just when you lose one piece anywhere in there, it puts more pressure on that position. And you definitely like to see more so far than what we've seen. They have 5 tight ends. There's all this talk about, who can they afford to get rid of? Well, at some point we need a conversation of like, who can they trust to step up and be that guy in a consistent way? It's been a position that since I've gotten here on this beat, they've just not been able to solve. They had Jack Doyle for half a year when I first got here. We know who he is, but when he retired, it just continues to be kind of a hodgepodge group in a mystery box.
Yeah. The thing is, like, just because they don't necessarily have that person doesn't mean that they can't be productive there. Like, there was some production there. They're just, like you said, it comes down to, it's not the number one. You don't have the true number one. You're going to kind of have to mix and match and play around with it. There's the underlying piece of this, and I want to do this real quick before we get to the other side of the Josh Downs injury, which is the thing sort of hanging over the camp more than anything else, I think. But real quick, one of the things that I've been telling myself, I know some of the other guys who watch a lot, I'm sure you have been as well, is the full offense has not been unleashed.
No.
And won't be on the training camp fields and won't be in the preseason games. And so that's one of the things I'm trying to remind myself, is that when we get to the real games and they're game planning people, there is going to be a heavy quarterback run element to the running game. And it's probably going to change a lot of what we're seeing on the training camp fields. Because I, if I'm being honest, I was just looking through it today as I got ready to to do a what to watch story for the preseason game. It's been, a week and a half-ish now of kind of uneven performance. The offense hasn't had like a true, just the offense dominates practice in about a week and a half. They've had good and bad, but again, we're not seeing the full thing, because why would you have Anthony Richardson run? Why would you be doing everything you could do, number one, when there's people in the cameras filming, and number two, in the stands with filming it, and number two, you're going to have like 3 or 4 weeks. 3 weeks after the last preseason game before you play your regular game to work on all that stuff, and you're going to tailor it to the opponent. I think all that stuff is kind of weighing on my mind about this offense, that like whatever we're seeing, whatever we think we're seeing, we have to take with a grain of salt because it's not the real offense.
Yeah, for sure. Even when we get to week 1, week 2, it's an evolving offense because good offenses do that. They build from 1 game through 17. We saw a few different versions of the Colts offense last year when they were even kind of hamstrung. That's just the way that Shane Steichen's going to adjust and grow this thing. And Jim Bob Cooter as well. So, yeah, we're not seeing a lot of the many design runs for Anthony Richardson. We're also not seeing what's going to happen, which is passing plays that turn into running plays because he's scrambling. Like there's times where he's just throwing it because it's like that you got to work on that a little bit. Like he's trying to just work some of these routes, throw to receivers he didn't get to throw too much last year. In the case of A.D. Mitchell, never has. There's plays like that in a real game when you've got to convert 3rd and 6, he's going to run it. Jalen Hurts in his last year with Shane Steichen as the play caller, ran 165 times, about 11 times a game. So that's I think what you can kind of set as a baseline here that we're not seeing out there. And yeah, and then there's just so much a big edge that they have right now is that nobody's seen this backfield. So it hurt them a lot it hurt last year to not have it. The silver lining to it is no one's seen it. So they're going to use that to their advantage. So it's not looking like what it's going to, which is a good thing because it has been choppy. Like it would not be, you can't write this up as like the offense is out here and just looking incredible. Like I said, I think the best part of the offense so far has been Josh Downs. So that's unfortunate that they lost him. I do trust Shane Steichen a lot to be someone who just adjusts to guys going down. We saw it last year at moments with Taylor out, obviously with Richardson out, having to go to Gardner Minshew. Most players, I think, for a 1 or 2 game sample, he's going to adjust really well to. It's a different conversation when you lose one of their big 3 players for a long stretch, but even he handled that pretty well last year with 2 of those 3 being out. So it's going to get a lot better than this. It needs to as well. It's just I don't have very many questions about this offense. The main one that I still have is it's that tight end room because that's the one group of players on this team I haven't seen do it well on an NFL field. So that's that's what I'm going to have my eye on the preseason is like, can they finally take that step forward?
You brought up something there that's also a good point because I've had people kind of ask a little bit about this. It's hard to explain on like a social media account or something like that. Someone was saying like, it feels like I've charted more sacks this year than previously. And how do you know that they'd be sacks? I'm kind of going off of, because the hard part is that, like, you're right. I cannot judge whether or not Anthony Richardson would have broken a tackle. And I can't really judge. Sometimes I can't judge like how they're going to close because they just run past him. Because obviously, if you hit the quarterback, that'd be way worse than what Nick Cross did to Josh Downs. But that's kind of how I'm doing it. Basically, how I'm doing it is when a guy pulls up or runs past, or in the case of Latu, sometimes he will kind of make a motion like, oh, I could have gotten him, and then follow him while he's scrambling and then do it again. If that stuff is going on, that's usually when I give a sack up. And I do think that Anthony Richardson is going to play differently in real games when he can actually be tackled.
Yeah.
I think there's some ways he's handling the pass rush that he will not once he has a chance to be tackled. I know it doesn't sound like that, but I'm just going off of his history of avoiding the pass rush in his career. He generally does not stand in the pocket and take a lot of sacks. And we've seen some of his pocket movement. It's just, I think that there's an inherent difficulty built in when guys can't actually try to take people down. So that's my basic explanation. Like I said, there's a lot of it for me that just comes down to, did the guy pull up? Did he stop his rush? That kind of thing. Like DeForest Buckner doesn't come close to finishing a rush. He just runs right past he slows down and just runs past Richardson. And so, like, I think DeForest Buckner's actually had a really great camp. He's looked just like DeForest Buckner's supposed to. It's just hard to know sometimes with the stuff. And I think the other thing is Colts fans kind of know what to expect from him. So you guys, I don't focus on him as much in, like, say, an observation story, because you guys kind of know DeForest Buckner's really good.
Yeah.
Let's get into the free safety of it all. Specifically the safety portion. Let's get into the safety portion of it first. Because Nick Cross yesterday tackled Josh Downs. There's no other way around it. He tackled Josh Downs in a 7-on-7, which is not as intense as 11-on-11. There's no other way to say it. Like, they're not really tackling to the ground in any of these things. But they're definitely not tackling to the ground or hitting each other in 7-on-7. It's lighter. Like, there's some hitting in 11-on-11. There's not 7-on-7. I took even more issue with the fact that it wasn't really like a thud. It was more of a grab him and then drag him down from behind situation. Not like a horse collar. I'm not describing a horse collar. I'm just describing he's like basically Josh Downs back completely to Nick Cross, cross his arms over, down his shoulders, and then sort of just the weight drags him down. And the reason that that's not smart is that's how you get hurt. Like, weight on the back of someone who's moving is how people get hurt. It's not smart. It's also like people are frequently asking, why don't they hit as much or tackle as much or do as much live contact as they did in the past? This play specifically, Nick Cross taking down Josh Downs and hurting Josh Downs, is why. That's why. There's your answer. So, because they don't want that to happen. They have only so many players who are key on any roster in the league, and they don't want them to get hurt. So this is my little mini rant, and why. But it's also my explanation of why Shane Steichen came out yesterday and basically said, you can't do that. I can't remember what his exact quote was, but it was, we've got to be smart. You can't take guys to the ground. That's why coaches in NFL games are always saying, stay up, stay up, stay up, in practices, I mean. Because when guys go to the ground, they get hurt, and then you might lose a key part of your offense for 4 to 6 weeks murky.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see when we get into joint practices, because they say the reason that some of these fights are breaking out at joint practices more and more often, and we saw last year with the Colts and the Eagles, is that players take care of their teammates, or are supposed to take care of their teammates a lot better than they would take care of somebody else's players in a practice. So it's a little troubling when you have a situation like this and it's not a joint practice, and it doesn't feel like players are taking care of other players quite well enough. And, you know, Nick, I understand why he was trying to make a tackle, is that he feels a ton of pressure to make plays right now. They've said it publicly, like, we need impact plays. We need more than our free safety just getting into the right run fit or reacting decently well to, you know, what he sees on a drop. Like, they need that position to do something. So that mindset has driven Nick to making some desperate plays. And sometimes it works out well. The practice before that, he undercut Kylan Granson and picked off Anthony Richardson. Really nice sliding catch. But, you know, in this instance, it has him doing something that was just completely unnecessary in a 7-on-7 drill where he didn't have any shot at the ball from what I could see. I was watching Nick pretty much that whole day because I was going to write on that safety position. And it was not – there was nothing added by him taking Josh to the ground the way he did. Josh was already heading to the ground, already sliding out of bounds, short gain, 7-on-7, all of that. And, yeah, and when Nick came over and he said that, you know, it's football and that like you're competing and that's what happens when you compete, that's showing you that mindset is for him, I've got to make this happen. I've got to make an impact play on every single play. Whereas for the rest of them, it's let's practice and get some work done, but let's not like crush each other here in the process. And so that was just a kind of classic example of everything we've talked about with this safety position coming to a head in a weird way, not a way that we would have guessed. But I do think it is absolutely a function of a couple things, which is Nick Cross is in a desperate spot, making desperate plays. But this is also the conversation that they've had with him is that they just don't know what to trust in him when he's out there, the decisions he's making, the decisions he's not making. And I noticed right after that hit happened, Shane Steichen chewed him out, and then he went to the second team for the most of the rest of practice. Now, they did bring him in at the end, so I'm not saying it was like a full-on benching, but they pretty much cut his first team reps for a majority of the rest of that after very clearly telling him that we did not like what you just did on that play, and you need a player to learn from that. So I'm sure it's a conversation they're having because he came right out after all of that, after the yelling, after getting moved to the second team and said it's football and I wouldn't have done it any differently. And that's where they need growth big time from these safeties in so many ways. And that's a very basic example of the growth that they're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that they have issues with the safeties is that they're not consistent and they're not making the right decisions consistently. Well, this is a different kind of decision. It's also an in-the-moment decision that wasn't made well. And so I do think to some degree there is a point there where it becomes a little bit of it's just another thing on the ledger to make them not so sure about it. Also, like if we start going through the options, it's hard to tell with coverages, especially from the sideline because I'm not up top and I can't see everything. It does feel to me, though, and the way that they have been breaking up the playing time, the practice time would back this up. Rodney Thomas has still been fairly inconsistent in coverage.
Yeah.
Up until the play where Downs took down Cross, fairly. He pretty much been him and Ronnie Harrison and Julian Blackmon the last couple of days. Like Thomas, I thought was kind of falling out of the competition. Maybe this gets him back in, but he has not been super consistent. I haven't seen. Have you seen Ronnie Harrison at free safety this week? Because when they use him now with the first team, he plays strong and Julian plays free.
And I think on the second team, he's mostly been at strong too.
Yeah.
That's where Rodney Thomas plays. I think it was a bit of an experiment with him. It was also, I think, ultimately just a measure of cross training of we're that lost at this position. We've got reps to hand out. Let's give him some so that at some point they'll be in a game and they may need to just send him over there. It's happened before for this team where it can be an injury that does that. It can be they're not liking what they're seeing in that game and they just have to do something different with a veteran. There's been games like that under Gus Bradley here with these safeties. So that's what I think that is. They're setting this all up for Nick Cross to take it. They just have pretty much said the others we see as either backups or cross-trained or, and the reason the more that they experiment, they're showing you that they haven't seen enough to believe in that yet. So I don't know. It's just people are reacting a lot to this, understandably so. Ed Dodds' comments on it yesterday made it backed up what Gus Bradley had said, which is they're not at all close to finalizing this.
Yeah.
His quote was, Ed Dodds says, I think we've got to get to the games. We're just trying to find the best combination to get all the best people out there at the same time. It's figuring not just the best combination of two guys, but which guy at free and which at strong, since they're different things stressed out of either of those positions. We've just got to keep watching them. Very interesting to discuss a position, basically two positions of your 11 on defense in this manner. They have preseason games. So yes, there is still some time to experiment, but I can't imagine if they were talking about wide receiver this way and they say, we have to figure out if a guy is a slot or maybe he's a tight end or maybe he's out wide. We got to get to the games and mix and match. It's like, I don't know. It doesn't give you a lot of faith that they have this down pat or that they have great options either, because it's been 9 practices of trying these options out, and this is the spot we're in.
Yeah. That's generally my read on it too. Like it's just very rare for a team to say we don't know. Like they don't always say this guy's the front runner, but they both Dodds and Bradley said we don't know yet, like straight up. In fact, Bradley said we're not close to knowing yet.
Mm-hmm.
Which I just said that there was a lot of time left. As we tape this, there's exactly a month to go before the season opener. But there's not as many training camp practices as there seem to be. When we go up there tomorrow, we have that practice, 2 joint practices next week against the Cardinals, and then 1 joint practice against the Bengals, and then that's pretty much it. And they have to start making roster decisions based on that stuff. I mean, they don't have to do the cuts right away, but they have to start making roster decisions after that. And you have to know who your free safety is and what your plan is there. So it's not a good situation. And I want to reiterate this. Like, I know safety has been devalued in the NFL, and it's not considered quite the same level of importance as it maybe used to be. You still have to have safeties you can trust, especially in this defense, especially in a zone defense that's built on guys at corner being able to play aggressively because they have help over the top. There was a play yesterday in practice. Juju Brents had 2 pass breakups early, and then Michael Pittman Jr. got him later on in the practice. And you and I were both unsure if part of the reason that he beat him was because he thought he had help over the top. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of stuff that makes this free safety thing not good. And we'll see whether or not it turns out to be one of those things where Chris Ballard is right or whether we're right.
Yeah. It's set up. It's pretty well set up to be that at this point. But man, it's just the thing about it is that, like, last year, so the point that Ballard was on last year with this sort of thing was the offensive line, where we wondered, they're just going to run it back. They're just going to have the same group. He said yes. He believed in what they did at the end of last year, wanted to roll it back. That was a classic case of we'll see if you're right or if we're right. And he was right on that. The offensive line carried that over. The new offensive line coach made all the difference in the world. Those guys bounced back to what they were before. The difference here, though, is that they are not expressing belief in what they have either. So this isn't a situation where, like, they believe a ton in Nick Cross. He's the free safety. No, we're not going to sign anybody. You guys will see. And we're here saying, well, I don't know about that. And then we'll find out who's right. Right now, for the front office to be right means that they're going to make a guess and then hope that that turns out well. Because that's what their assistant GM said yesterday that they're doing. We're getting into the games. We have to see the best combination of which guy at which position, since there's 2 of them. Like, they have a great strong safety on this team. He looks awesome. Julian Blackmon looks like a Pro Bowl player out there. He had a very good year last year in his first year playing.
Arguably the best defensive player in camp.
Yeah, I definitely I think it's either him or Laiatu Latu. Says something about how disruptive he's been. I'd give it to Julian, though, especially what he's being asked to do, to play 2 different positions, where even when they move him at free, he's making plays in ways that, like, none of the other free safeties are. So my thing is, you already have a really good strong safety. So I don't know, why are you trying to figure out who's going to be your strong and who's going to be your free, unless you don't believe at all in what's at free. And so that's what's very different about this one than some other situations, where sometimes Chris Ballard does often dig his heels in. He believes in players that he's drafted and put in a spot, and we're skeptical about it. And there's been some trade-offs over the years as far as who's been right on that. Like I said, last year he was right on the offensive line. Last year he was wrong at outside cornerback. The guys they rolled out there were not and put around, and just went young there. It was not enough, and they had a lot of fires to put out throughout the season on that. But this one, it is just weird for them to be like, it's just all very weird. We have a plan, but we haven't found it yet. Hopefully by the end of the preseason, we'll find it. Yeah. We've just exhausted this point, so we really are going to see. It'll be interesting. It's the spot they have Julian Blackmon in, though. I just find very interesting is that he is all of a sudden becoming their MVP of the defense because he kind of has to play two positions interchangeably, and they'll figure out which one they need to have him at, which is more about who can they get by with better at the other one. And yeah, it's a curious spot to be in.
Well, and the other thing that we keep saying, and I think this is one of the things that ended up not working out for us with the offensive line that Ballard brought up later. But like one of the other things that you and I keep saying is, what's the reason that Julian Blackmon didn't get a long-term deal? Because he has injury concerns.
Mm-hmm.
He's had trouble staying healthy. And if he has trouble staying healthy this season,
yeah,
then we're talking about maybe two guys you don't trust, or like a guy like Ronnie Harrison, who has not been a full-time starting safety in the league since 2021 and hasn't super stood out in the practice field. He made some nice plays last year, but he's playing linebacker for a lot of those plays. There's reason for concern. We'll put it that way. I have some reasons for concern.
And like we've brought up a lot of times, the thing that's really gotten surprising to me is the lack of new competitors to this, is that they just brought back guys they had last year that last year what they told us was they didn't believe in Rodney Thomas when they benched him for Nick Cross. They didn't believe a ton in Nick Cross by not playing him much in the first 15 games of the season. And they told Ronnie Harrison, you're only a linebacker now. Now, look, things changed a little bit. They do like Ronnie Harrison more as a safety because he stepped in late in the season. It went better than maybe they initially thought. But still, it's a long way off of what they've originally laid out. The thing about it that's interesting is, like you mentioned, that the safety position's been devalued across the NFL. We certainly saw that free agency. I think one guy got a big deal so far. Xavier McKinney from the Packers kind of was the one outlier that got a big contract. Quandre Diggs just signed for $3 to $5 million with the Titans. So these guys are going, like, the league is in general moving that way. But the reason is that most of the league runs defenses with two high safeties, where it's a little bit more plug and play. It's a little bit more about the system, getting guys who can just kind of be in the right spot and make them throw underneath, and they're not set up to make as many impact plays because they're taking away the deep ball. Like you pointed out, Gus Bradley's defense is different. They run a lot of single high safety, a lot of zone. When it's hit its peak, it's when he's had Earl Thomas at free safety and Cam Chancellor at strong safety, or moments when he had like Derwin James as a versatile safety, and maybe Julian Blackmon is stepping into being a star again if he stays healthy. But to me, all of this is more reason to sign a safety, because it's a market inefficiency that you can pounce on because it matters a lot more to you than everyone else. Is you're saying free safety is so critical to us in a league where the rest of the teams are like, we don't need to pay it that crazy much. It's brought the price down to where Quandre Diggs can sign for $3 million. That should be the perfect opening to go out and sign somebody. Now we're down to one guy who's left out there, and it's Justin Simmons. He's visiting with the Saints. So nothing's solidified there as of we're recording it right now. But obviously, if you're going to let a guy go and be wined and dined like that, there's a good chance that you're not going to sign that player. So very interesting to square having a second team All-Pro out there available at a position that they said, we need to get into the preseason game so we can mix and match and figure out who plays what position. I don't know. It continues to be hard to understand, but that's where they're at. And so that makes kind of free safety. That's why on a day-to-day basis, we're watching it all the time. And something I learned early on covering this stuff is that, like, the pass rush is an area in defense where teams love to rotate, keep guys fresh. We always hear you want to have 8. But when they play, the more players you play in the back end means you don't believe in the ones you have. Like you don't just rotate safeties to do it, corners to do it.
Secondaries and corners are generally the 100% of plays, guys.
Yeah. If you look at
safeties, corners, and middle linebackers.
Yep.
Or whoever your coverage linebacker is.
And if you go back and look at the Seahawks, and I use them only as like that's the high end of like what this should ideally be. The Legion of Boom defenses, they didn't rotate out Bobby Wagner and Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas and KJ Wright. And of course, why would you? But it's like they keep saying what we're looking for. What Gus Bradley specifically says, we're looking for someone to consistently step up at free safety. And so when guys are consistently doing it, they're going to get to play more. When you pull them out, that means they're not consistently doing the things you want to see. And that's what we saw this week was Nick Cross. They put that challenge out there. Nick Cross made a great play on Monday, picked off Anthony Richardson. He's not stacking it back-to-back days, though, because the very next day gets Josh Downs injured, gets chewed out by his coaches, gets moved to the second team. And afterwards, they're saying we need the preseason games to keep experimenting. So they're as lost on this as they've ever been. And I think they were more confident in it 2 months ago than they are right now. So we'll see how that evolves.
It would be one thing. We're belaboring the point, but I don't care because it's the big chance.
The only storyline this training camp.
It'd be one thing if you were talking about a team with 3 experienced starting corners, an experienced starting strong safety, and maybe we're going to take a chance at this other spot. This isn't that team.
No.
Corner has not been nearly as big of a story. I think Juju Brents has been fairly solid.
Mm-hmm.
Jalen Jones, less so to me, but Gus Bradley likes what he's been doing. And then Dallas Flowers has been pretty inconsistent, I think. But the guys I mentioned, that's still like, what, a total of 2 starting seasons among all 3 of them? If you give Jalen Jones a full starting season last year and then partials for Dallas Flowers and Juju Brent, that might be stretching it. It might be more like 1.5.
I think so. I think it's, let's see, Flowers and Brents combined for 12 starts.
Yeah, so definitely more like 1.5 because Jones didn't start until like the 5th game or something like that.
Yeah. He played all 17, but he didn't start it. Yeah, it's interesting because like Jalen Jones is a guy that he feels very matchup dependent. So when he's guarding more physical receivers, he can do really well. He can get in their grill. He wins. If you're going to try and win in very short yardage with him, it's tough. He has a lot of trouble with guys like Josh Downs. Now, a lot of the corners are. But because those like really good change of direction guys, that's just not his hulking skill set. He's a hulking outside corner. Juju is too. I think Juju's shown a little bit more ability to stick with those guys. But the point is, Jalen Jones, they like him because, I mean, he's approaching this. He's really working at it. He has a skill set that fits the Seattle style defense, which is that you're not supposed to cover all down the field when you're that guy. You're supposed to do a lot of funneling into other players. They've got Kenny Moore at the nickel. They should have Julian Blackmon as strong safety. They need the free safety to make that work, though. So if they want this version of Jalen Jones, I can buy their cornerback plan if they have 2 stud safeties. But these young cornerbacks who are not rangy outside cornerbacks need a lot of help behind them. And I don't know. It's also like with Julian Blackmon, we'll see if he gets moved to free safety. We'll see if he can still be the same star there. 2 years ago, he played that spot, and it wasn't a great year. Now, he was coming off the Achilles. So that's hard to know how much of that was physical. But the point is they moved him much closer to the ball, and he had a big-time season. And then so far in camp has made tons of plays close to the ball. Some also when he's been back deep. But I think that's hard to read into because, like, the same reasons we said the offense is hard to read. They're like Anthony sometimes is just going to chuck the ball deep rather than take off and run. So there are naturally more chances, more balls up in the air down the field to make plays on. I'm skeptical that he's going to be the same playmaker as a single high free safety. That seems more like if you put him back there, it's more because he's super fast and trustworthy and he's going to clean up for everybody else, which does help raise the floor. It helps keep this from being a total emergency, but you lose the upside of that. And so then who's the playmaker if he's back there just cleaning things up? It kind of all falls on Kenny Moore. But if you're not getting good enough play out of your strong safety, that's going to stretch Kenny in that way too. Like what I would love to see this defense do is get to a spot where teams have to throw at Julian Blackmon or Kenny Moore because they have great ball skills. And I think that could turn this defense into pretty elite levels. That's what like Matt Eberflus defenses were really good at, making you confront Shaquille Leonard and Kenny Moore in coverage. This one hasn't gotten to that level as much, but I think they could get there if they had a free safety they really trust. But so far, they don't have that.
Yep. While we're taping this, I was watching. I've got the Olympics on in the background, and I just saw a water polo shootout. I have a new most terrifying thing in the Olympics. Before it was just water polo in general because you're just playing a sport while trying to not drown. Now I have. There's no defense, and someone can throw a ball right at my face that I have to block while trying to not drown.
And you just found another pursuit that Michael Pittman Jr. is going to try.
Yeah, Nate's referencing the video the Colts did where they like asked guys what sport they would have gone to the Olympics in, and Nate's got the right take on this. Nate like nailed this right away, so I'm just going to let you go on. We'll end the podcast with this, but just like the hubris of some Colts and the realism of other Colts, because you've got a good take on this.
Well, it's funny because like some guys are jokingly naming some different sports, but like Jonathan Taylor gave a very measured answer where he talked about if he trained forever, he could, eventually maybe win bronze in the 100-meter dash, which Jonathan Taylor was. I mean, it's a high bar, obviously, win bronze, but he was a superstar track athlete like his high school. So it's sort of like an alternate reality if he only did that instead of football. He gives the realistic answer, and Michael Pittman is just trying to name every sport he can think of that the Olympics has. Just like I'm going to win gold in all of them. And just like, he's just standing there like continually coming up with new ones. So as many variations as you can find of these Olympic pursuits, the harder that it is, the more Michael Pittman Jr. is convinced that he would win the gold. Because it's like, well, the fewer people that would even try this, like that's right up my alley. So.
Juju Brent said water polo, and I actually sort of buy that because his body is like very swimmery.
Yeah, it is
super long and everything. My other observation from that, Evan Hall and Eric Johnson, both, I think, said wrestling. And just so you know, for those of you who maybe if you haven't been around wrestlers or anybody who wrestled in high school or whatever. If someone says that that's the sport that they could maybe play in the Olympics, you don't want to mess with them. Like that's the last person you want to mess with, because that means they wrestled for a significant amount of time, and wrestlers are lethal. That's they're extremely lethal. So
that's why people like teams love when offensive linemen have a wrestling background, because it's like this guy means business. Like a tight end and an offensive line, if you have a wrestling background, it's pretty much built. That sport is pretty much built the Iowa Hawkeyes football program. Is get some people who wrestle in the state that loves wrestling, put them on the offensive line and tight end, and just go heavy personnel and just throw people out of the bar. So
so since we did this, we have to ask if there was an Olympic sport, which one would it have been for you?
I think there was an alternate. So I can't say with confidence that it would be wrestling because I'm not a wrestler. But I think there's an alternate.
Built like one.
There's an alternate timeline where I could have been. I did it when I was really little, like I'd say probably like 3rd, 4th grade, because my whole family is wrestlers. and I was really good at it. I was finishing like top 3 in every meet, and I just didn't like it at all. And then I came to find out that like the sports I liked, I am not tall enough for. Like basketball and football, and like it was a little hard. I mean, when I'm out there, as much as I love football, being a 173-pound defensive end was a little bit difficult in Northeast Ohio, where the linemen are very big. So I like sports where like there's a handicap on the weight class, and so wrestling, if I could redo it, could be the one. But I don't say that to mean like I have those skills right now, because I do not. But it would either be probably the wrestling or weightlifting's in there now too. That'd be kind of fun.
Anything swimming, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No shot. I also can't do any of the flipping stuff, even with like diving board or trampoline help. So gymnastics was out early. I tried wrestling. I'm from Wisconsin, and northern Wisconsin is a wrestling area. Okay. And so I tried wrestling when I was in 4th grade. And by that point, people who were wrestling in my area had been doing it since kindergarten. So I got my butt handed to me in like 3 straight tournaments. And I was like, I'm going to go back to basketball. Basketball,
right?
What?
So basketball?
No, maybe more like I ran a little bit of track, but I mean the sport, it's not in the Olympics anymore. It's baseball. Baseball should be in the Olympics, and that would have been the one that I was. That was my 2 best sports were football and baseball, and because the position I play, you need to be larger than I am. I mean, I could have played like a D3 type safety level, but baseball would have been my best shot. When I was in track, I ran the 100 and the 400. When I was in track, I ran the 100 and the 400, which is a super weird combination, but it's because I'm terrible on the curve. So I couldn't run the 200. And I know obviously the 400 is about a lot of curves, but there's so much distance in the 400. It's just about how long you can run at top speed.
Did you play free or strong safety?
I was in a 44 defense where I was an outside linebacker against wing tees and a strong safety against like spread formations.
I got you. It's kind of like the Ronnie Harrison skill set now.
Yeah. There's a lot of there. When I was playing football in Wisconsin, a lot of people were still running wing tee.
Well, you said you could play at a D3 level, which is just interesting. There's a football team that practices in Westfield. It's looking for safeties. Free and strong are both open. They're experimenting in the games, so I will try to pass your name along. I know you're already the backup center for that team.
I have significant injury problems at this point in my career, though.
I know you're already the backup center of the Colts, so I don't know if defense too, but
significant durability questions at this point. So that's the podcast. Hope you guys are enjoying the Olympics. The Colts will have a preseason game on Sunday. We don't start doing our post-game podcasts until after the regular season starts. I just don't think there's really a point when they have some of these games the starters aren't going to play and stuff like that. But
come up with villain of the game on a preseason game. All right, the villain of the game is whoever put the Bengals game at 8 p.m. There we go.
Yeah. But that's where these situations stand. We'll have a little more clarity after the preseason game. Those aren't the be all end all, but they are data points. For the IndyStar, I'm Joel A. Erickson. This has been Nate Atkins. We'll be back out at camp tomorrow and for joint practices against the Arizona Cardinals next week, which we are affectionately terming the Marvin Harrison sweepstakes. I just coined that, but that's all we're talking about with those joint practices is Marvin Harrison Jr. being here for joint practices.